those New South Wales resignations today, 3 dropping like flies, 1 a Labor candidate, 2 are ministerial Liberal, so front bench resignations. I'll give you all those details shortly, but let's get into issues surrounding the voice. Splits emerged today after a meeting yesterday of the PM's expert referendum group in Parliament. This Indigenous working group is divided about the Prime Minister's proposal, the wording that he put to that Garma festival last year, that the voice would make representations, he says, both to the Parliament and the executive government. This group believes that that sort of wording might sink the referendum. And this all goes back to the justiciability or the likelihood that decisions or government not taking the view of the voice could find its way into the courts. Joining me now, Gary Johns, a former minister in the Keating government and a committee member of the No campaign. Gary, thank you for your time. I think we saw from Peter Dutton today, after that meeting yesterday, he was there with Julian Lisa and a whole lot of government MPs, of course, listening and participating with this expert group, the PM's expert group on the voice. But he made some comments today in the media that are the most forceful to date. He's saying that without detail, the Prime Minister's voice to the Parliament will fail, and he's calling on the Prime Minister to put that detail out there. But they seem very hell-bent on meeting their deadline of a vote before the end of the year.
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister wants to get this done one way or the other. As I understand it, the debate yesterday was about whether there'd be privileged access on the part of Aboriginal leaders to government and Parliament. You cannot distinguish that. You can't cauterise it. Just because a minister is in the House, you can say you have access and he's outside, or he or she is outside the House, you can't have access. It's a nonsense. The voice is all about giving privileged access to a subgroup of people. You and I get our vote once every 3 years, but an Aboriginal group called The Voice will have permanent, regular access to ministers inside and outside the House. And we are deeply opposed to that privilege.
So people understand it, Gary, because you've been in the cabinet room. If anyone else for a different group of people in Australia, another ethnic group, let's say, people with a commercial interest, wanted access to ministers, well, there's things like lobbyist registers. There's a whole lot of disclosures that have to be made. There's a lot of transparency about these sorts of engagements. But if there is a permanent place, basically a seat at the table, and we know that Pat Dodson, I think it was, wants a permanent seat at something like National Cabinet for members of The Voice. This underscores your point about preferencing some Australians more than others.
Oh, absolutely. Look, it's possible for anyone to gain access to a government minister or a head of a department or whatever, but you have to go through the hoops. You have to get in line. You have to get that appointment. You have to lobby for it. But here's a model that the Prime Minister wants to establish so that one group permanently gets to the head of the queue, and that means the rest of us get knocked down a peg and someone will drop off. I tell you who's really angry about this. Native title holders. There's 80,000 Australians of Aboriginal descent hold native title. They're not happy that they haven't been consulted about the voice model, and they can see that they're going to be the ones knocked down a peg. Someone will come in over the top after they've spent years organising themselves, doing their own politics, getting their own voices established, and then all of a sudden this other group will come in over the top. They are not happy about this.
That goes to the point of the multitude of Aboriginal organisations already. We know native title groups, land councils, there's specific Aboriginal health bodies. How do they all fit in with the voice? I mean, presumably, because it's entrenched in the Constitution, the voice has primacy.
It will. I'll tell you what will happen. The delegates will not be elected, they'll be selected. So there'll be an almighty bunfight within 35 regions as to who's the biggest beast and gets to nominate a national delegate. And then that national delegate, because they're not elected, they will look after their own organisation. So that's the bun fight, right? It'll mainly be won by people who run Aboriginal controlled health services because they're the biggest employer of Aboriginals in Australia. They will get to be the new cabinet, if you like, the Aboriginal cabinet, and guess what they'll lobby for? More money for their interests. I mean, it's pretty obvious, it'd be silly not to do that. So they won't even represent Aboriginal voices, they'll represent a subset of Aboriginal voices. And I can tell you, because I've spoken to a number of people recently, native title holders especially, those more in remote areas, will be left out of the equation. They haven't been asked about this and they'll be sidelined.
I make the point, if you are a voter in the NT, where a lot of remote Aboriginal people most affected by disadvantage live, of course, they only get one vote in the referendum. But if you're an elite in Victoria or New South Wales, let's say, you get a state vote, you'll get a national vote. You're going to get counted once in the NT. I guess I think there's a lot of political truth in Peter Dutton's assessment today that we're a long way from this referendum passing. But I have to say, given the money and the corporate weight and the government weight of the Yes campaign, they're a long way from losing. I mean, they haven't even started to roll out what we think will be television advertising, wall-to-wall messages about the voice, all the emotional pressure that's going to go through companies and schools. It's a long way to go.
Yeah, Peter, it has to be fought to the last vote. We, the no case, are heavily outgunned. But we do have the arguments. One argument is simple. In South Australia soon, Aboriginal people will get a second vote. So every other South Australian voter will become a second-class citizen. They'll get a vote once every 3 or perhaps 4 years, and an Aboriginal subgroup will get a vote once every 3 or 4 years, and then an extra vote and special access to Parliament, Cabinet and senior government officials. That's not fair.
Keep up the fight, Gary Johns. There's a lot of people who are looking to you to sort of lead the charge. Thank you for being with us tonight.